Roy, good. Jonathan Organ here, director of Northart Gallery in Northcote, Auckland. We're very privileged to have you join us today, Roy. And I have a few questions for you about your art practice. Let's just fire into it. Roy, in your latest series of paintings, who or what were these originally influenced and inspired by?
It's titled very obviously the Gothic series. The inspiration for this work, which has worked from over 3 years now, from 1916, late 2016 I started. It came about through a visit to Dunedin with my late painter friend J.S. Parker. He was a former Francis Hodgkins fellow, and it was the anniversary year for Francis Hodgkins. He asked me to join him, and it reminded me that the both of us as art students had taken a weekend break in Dunedin back in the 60s, and I'd never been back since. So this was a great opportunity to get to that town again. It was great being back in Dunedin, and I started to explore the city again, and came across a church that I wasn't aware of. It's the well-known First Presbyterian Church in Dunedin. And it's a very late Gothic building, a beautiful building. In fact, I've got a photo here. It's
fantastic.
You might be able to see.
Beautiful.
And it's a photo I took, and I don't usually take photos, but I was so taken by this building. I just couldn't get over its symmetry and aspiring, soaring structure. So I took the photograph and then put that aside. I didn't think much about it again until I got back to Auckland and the studio. And the connection with the aspirational movement and upwards thrust of this Gothic cathedral just connected with me in the sense that I'd always explored structures, symmetrical structures, and the early days, early 70s, I was probably one of the first to use the triangle as a format. Of course, the triangle and Gothic structure have a connection visually. So that's where the inspiration came from, and it resulted in 20-odd paintings, which, of course, we hope to eventually show at Northart. So that's where that inspiration came from.
Your work, Roy, has a very close affinity to the sublime. Does the visual language of geometrical abstraction come to you from where?
You're right to make that mention of the word sublime, because in fact that connects us back to what I've just been saying about the Gothic church in Dunedin. As we all know, the Christians of those days sought solace in and uplift within the parameters of those wonderful buildings with their tremendous height and uplift. And of course, it was the search for the Godhead, the sublime, really, that motivated both the priests and the parishioners. So there's a translation, a fairly obvious one, to the use of abstract language in contemporary art. If you know a little bit about the early 20th century pioneers of modernism and abstraction, it was something that they felt that by returning to primary forms in art, it would enable them to better seek that sort of goal in their own work. That's pretty much been the motivation in my own work.
That sort of segues into the question, what does your art mean to you personally?
It's a simple answer. By keeping at it, it's kept me sane, because, like many artists, I've had to have a day job to support my art practice, and I've worked most of my time in most design fields to provide the money to keep the family and the system going. It was the painting practice, usually at night in the early days, because full-time working in other jobs. It's that practice that kept me sane. It kept me balanced. It cleared the air. It lifted me out of the hurly-burly of modern life and earning a living. And by keeping at it, by keeping consistent, it became like a meditative process. And I think most artists would empathise with that.
And for younger contemporary artists or emerging artists or even mid-career artists, how have you developed your career over the years?
Well, in fact, I've had that a question asked before, especially when I used to do a little bit of part-time teaching and young students, of course, mostly in design, wanted to know how one went about that, to promote yourself, to put yourself out there and to do the work you want to do. And there's really no easy answer, but one simple response is to say that you've got to keep at it. You've got to be consistent. Once you've found your direction in art especially, it's keeping on that track, always doing it, not getting distracted by the many side alleys of contemporary art, especially now in these days of postmodernism. There's so many non-art activities that are posing as art these days, which are more likely to be media-driven, theatre, and other social and political commentaries that, to my mind, don't have a lot of real meaning to the true reason for art. In my view, if you're wanting to make political statements and social commentaries or even tell national stories figuratively, it's better done in other mediums like film or print.
So what you're saying is, personally, you're very disciplined in your own vision and your own practice, and you're very aware of having to stay focused on your personal art practice.
Yes, I think most artists would say, if they were really quizzed about what they're doing, they would say they're making art. And I think it's this making that's lost currency in recent times. There's a lot of art that isn't made. It's found or discovered or installed from other sources. And I really feel that, in a way, it's lost its way, because I discovered recently the meaning of the word artist, the root Latin meaning of the word artist, and it comes from the Latin word ars, A-R-S, and the meaning of that is to make. And I thought it really sums up the current situation. We've lost some of that drive to make things. And connecting that with a more recent quote from another late artist friend, Ian Scott, he said to me once, "I make something every day." I personally thought that was probably a bit much, but Ian was a very prolific artist, and he was driven to do it. And I think he summed up, in a way, the fact that we don't really have a lot of control over this process. Once you're committed to the business of art, the drive to keep making it, keep doing it, is inevitably there. And I've especially found it in this current situation we're in with the COVID-19 lockdown. One would have thought, well, gee, this is good. But really, for artists, there's not a lot changed. We're still at home. We're making art from home. I initially started to do a lot of maintenance work, but inevitably I was drawn back to the studio, because that's the way it is. Those are the wheels that turn within me.